Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here on this session on zero copy and when to federate, ingest, accelerate cache. I know that's a lot, but we'll start with our forward-looking statement. I'm sure you've seen this multiple times. Please make any purchasing decisions based on what's available in the market today. Thank you. It's a very busy day. You're missing the hackathon to be here, so thank you for joining us on this session. A quick introduction. I'm Gina Nichols. I'm a director with our Data 360 product team, and with me I have Vijay. He is a senior director on our Data 360 product team, and he's a product manager for Zero Copy. A quick introduction to Data 360. How many of you here have heard about Data 360? All right, great. I'm going to skip this slide since you know what it already does. But to set the context, we're going to talk about connecting data. You know, everything starts with bringing all of your data together, and today you have data in multiple places. You can have data in existing Salesforce apps. You could have data outside of this Salesforce ecosystem. You could have third-party apps, and we have many ways in which you can bring that data into Data 360. We have batch and streaming. We have unstructured ingestion, we have real-time, and we have zero copy. Batch and streaming, you know, it's planned transfers, the legacy ETLs, you drop the file, we pick it up, we bring it in. You have real-time, you have ingestion, which is under 5 minutes. You can bring your unstructured data in from, you know, Google Drives, from SharePoint. We have real-time, where you can bring in data in sub-seconds into our real-time layer in Data 360. And then we're going to talk about zero copy today and when to use it. Zero copy is where you don't copy your data into Data 360. You virtualize your data so that it stays where the data resides and stays where it is originally brought in, like your Snowflake or your Databricks or your Google BigQuery. The session is, when do you use zero copy? Okay, so this deck is going to be available after this session, so don't worry about taking screenshots or anything. You can download the deck. So when to use zero copy? I'm going to provide a simple yes/no on when to use it. Number one, is your data in Data 360 already? You know, don't need zero copy. Just use native data cloud model. You ingest, you harmonize, you brought it in. Is your use case a high-value use case? Meaning, is it omni-channel? Is it going to power AI? Is it going to be towards customer retention? You know, if it's not, then it's not necessarily a zero-copy use case. You can deprioritize it. If it is a high-value use case, now, depending on the payload size, is it a small, simple request, less than, you know, a point-in-time lookup? If it's less than 10 records, use APIs, right? Not really a use case for zero copy. If it is, if it's a large data set that you want to bring in, if it's more than 10 records, and you need data from multiple systems, you're going to go down this path again. Does it require data from multiple systems? No. Use simpler integration patterns? Yes. We're now going to be looking at zero copy. Again, is it high value? Is it multiple rows, not a simple payload? Is it distributed across multiple systems? Where does the data live? Where does it reside? If it's Snowflake, Google BigQuery, AWS, you use query federation. Again, if it supports Iceberg Parquet, you use file federation. And then if it's unsupported, you try to offload that data into Snowflake or into an Iceberg file format, supported data lake, so you can use zero copy with Data 360. This is some use cases across many industries, but I'm going to talk about a use case that we're all very familiar with. Everybody drives a car. We see all that data coming in, the IoT data from your vehicle telemetry, landing in Snowflake, and then being used to personalize experiences for you using zero copy with Data 360. Again, that's a very simple use case that we can relate to. Now we're going to talk a little bit about what's happening behind the scenes with Data 360 and more. So Vijay, take on.
Thank you, Gina. So let's let's first start off with the architecture. Let's talk about how does zero copy work. Gina spoke about the different ways in which you can bring in data. Let's have a look at the architecture. Let's look at some of the components. That will help us with our conversation as we move forward. We'll again go through a similar exercise where we'll talk about how do you choose between file and query federation? When do you use caching? So we'll get into all those. But let's start with the architecture. What you're seeing here on the screen is the architecture where you're seeing both the components in play here. On the top, you see the Data 360 compute. And on the bottom right, you have the Data 360 Salesforce Managed Lakehouse Storage. To your left is the customer managed data warehouse or data lake. So this is the component that comes into play when you're using zero copy. So anytime you're using zero copy, you're accessing the data that lives in either your data warehouse or your data lake, and you're just using it for the purpose of the particular use case that you're running without copying it. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're looking to segment data and you're looking for all the customers in North America who bought jackets over the last 60 days. So from a query perspective, you have three filters here. You have region equals North America, product equals jacket, and a time period. What we do is take that query, which is written in Data 360 SQL, convert it to the native SQL of the source. So if it's Snowflake, we do it accordingly. If it's Databricks, accordingly. Push it down to your compute, run the query, and bring back the pertinent data set. Right, so that's one. Now in this case, what I want to highlight is you're using two computes. We would be running this query on your compute, and once we bring back the data, we would use the Data 360 compute to join all the data together. There's two computes into play, and we'll talk about this in a second. The second mode is file federation, which is our new offering. We launched it last year. With file federation, we bypass your compute. We directly hit your storage layer, access the data that's required, and then use the Data 360 compute to run it. And for this, the files have to be in Parquet format. We support Iceberg files today, and you'd use an Iceberg REST catalog as the way to connect to your storage layer. So we spoke about the two different modes, right? Let's take a deeper look into query versus file. How do they compare? And how should you think about it when you're going through the process of understanding which one works best for your case? So from a setup perspective, for those of you who use zero copy query federation, you're just a JDBC connection away, right? One connection, you're all done. With file federation, you would require the use of a catalog and a storage connection because you have those two different layers that's in play here. Again, which I said, which is from a setup perspective, single setup versus a multi-step. The data access for query federation happens at the query layer, and with file federation, directly hits your storage, does not use your compute layer at all. The fourth point is critical, which is when do I use query versus file from a volume perspective? When you have data volumes, or let me put it this way, when you're trying to access or bring back data volumes that are less than 100 million rows of data, live query works great. And when I say when you're bringing back, I'll give you an example here. Let's say you have a billion row table in Snowflake, but based off the filters that you're pushing down, the number of rows that satisfies these conditions, let's say, are about, I'm going to say 20 million. Works great. It's that 20 million that should be taken into consideration when you're thinking about this. If it goes beyond 20 million with query federation, we do offer the ability for you to cache your data. And we'll talk about where caching works better versus live query. We'll do that in a second. With file federation, if you have billions of rows, you can easily and seamlessly access your data from your Parquet files, from your Iceberg tables into Data 360. Compute, we spoke about it, where with query federation, it's a dual compute. File federation, just a single compute, Data 360. What this means from a cost perspective is you would not incur a compute cost on your end when using file federation. Right, your data warehousing credits will not be consumed when you're using file federation, but however with query federation you would because you're running the query. Security, all the governance that you set in your data warehouse for the service principal that's used during the connection creation will be honored. FLS, RLS, OLS, any of those. With catalog, we currently support OLS. Again, that's where the Iceberg community is moving towards. I mean, again, as they get more granular, we'll continue to adopt. In fact, we are one of the early leaders here adopting Iceberg, which is why as the community progresses, we will get into adopting more of these features. And then the next one is critical, which is CDC. There are certain features within Data 360 that requires a change data capture. What that means is, let's say I'll take an example of flows. With flows, you could set an action here today which says, if the customer deletes a row or changes a certain row, then take a certain action in Data 360. If you want to do that with Query Federation today, because of the fact that we do not have access to the storage layer, you would have to cache the data. Whereas with File Federation, because the architecture is very similar to our native architecture, which is we use Iceberg. Again, with File Federation, the only difference is we're using your Iceberg table and your lake as opposed to ours. We are able to use those snapshots to capture the CDF, and therefore you do not need to cache. You can leave your data in the storage, and you'll be able to use all these features. Which is this an extension of what we spoke there, which is do I use query or file? And the recommendation fundamentally is if you have external platforms with dedicated compute and your data volumes are less than 100, which you're bringing back, Query Federation works great. Otherwise, we have File Federation, which works. So let's go through the exercise of how do we think about this, right? Again, very similar to what Gina had spoken. If your data is in Data 360, great. Use your native data cloud model. But if you're accessing frequent and real-time, smaller queries, you have File Federation, where you can use storage-driven, you can retrieve these large data sets, right? So anytime you have high volumes of data, historical data, and you have use cases that require you to use CDC, File Federation works really great. On the other end, we have Query Federation, smaller data set, ad hoc queries, and if you want to go slightly more than the 100 million limit that we're talking about here, you can cache your data. And here, again, if you have a CDC-based use case, we recommend that you use caching. So you have either caching or File Federation. You have both. The only condition here is if you already have a setup data warehouse instance, caching works great. If you're willing to move down the path of Iceberg REST catalog and Iceberg tables, then File Federation works with CDC. Now let's dive a little deeper into the whole Query Federation part. Right? Query has two components. We spoke about caching, and then we spoke about live query. So when do we use caching? When should I use caching versus live query? Think about a use case where you're using a dashboard in Data 360, and you have 500 analysts using the dashboard on a daily basis. And let's assume that your data only changes every 24 hours. In this case, if you notice, caching will work better, because if you use live query, you're going to push down 500 queries each time to bring back the same data set, which has not changed, right? It's the same data set, nothing's changed, but you're just trying to bring back the same data set. Caching works really great in those scenarios. With caching, we also offer incremental refresh. What that is as your data changes, we're not going to pull the whole data set each time. We're only going to pull in what's changed on your side, right? So the quick TLDR, fast-moving data, when you have real-time updates, use live query. So if your data is changing let's say every 5 minutes, and you need access to that data, live query works great. We do offer incremental refresh anywhere from 7 days. What that would mean is if your data is changing on a less regular basis and you have more pings going to it, caching would work great. But this reflects that, which is frequent low change data, caching works great. If you have fast-moving, real-time data, you want access to the most updated data in your data warehouse, go for Query Federation. Live query. Some of the other features that to consider are cross-system network latency can affect some of these. Bandwidth especially plays a very critical role when you're using File Federation. You're moving large volumes of data, so your performance is guaranteed going to be affected by the bandwidth. And then region and cloud. This is something that is very critical. If there's one suggestion or feedback we give new customers is always try to have your storage layer and especially your storage bucket. I mean, it could be S3, Blob, S3 especially, in the same region as Data Cloud Tenant. The reason is if you have cross-cloud or cross-region use cases, those do contribute towards the latency of your performance. And lastly, two major use cases where we highly recommend file federation or caching. One is identity resolution. It's extremely complex, it's compute intensive, caching the data works great. Secondly, for incremental IR, you require CDC, where file federation would automatically offer it, or if you're using query federation, caching is the path. Similarly, for segment activation, it's the same recommendation we have. Use acceleration or file federation. With that being said, let me now hand it back to Gina for more.
Thanks, Vijay. As an architect, it's very important to consider how you're going to design for zero copy. You've picked when to federate, you've picked whether to use query federation or file federation, you've picked zero copy. But here are some things that are going to help you save cost. Cost to serve both on the data cloud, Data 360 side, but also on your data warehouse side. So the first thing is data locality. So avoid mixing local and remote data, meaning here's my data that's in Data 360, and then here's my data in via zero copy being accessed, and I'm going to try to do something with it. Try to avoid those scenarios because they're going to drive up cost to serve. Second is query frequency. Minimize unnecessary live queries. Like Vijay said, if you have that dashboard use case where you're trying to bring in 500 people are using the same data set over and over again, you don't really need it to be live. You can cache that data. Third is disable unnecessary use of zero copy data. An example of this is when you have, the edits, the drop-down which is populated with recommended values. You can turn that off so it doesn't actually go back and try to populate that every time with zero copy. When you're using queries to retrieve data, make sure you use pushdowns to optimize the amount of data processed. That means you're limiting the number of data that comes back. So always make sure that you're doing that. We covered a lot, but determine if it's the best case fit. Does data change infrequently? Is real-time data access required? Is storage cost a concern? Is there regulatory compliance, locality requirements? Keep all of these things in mind when you're designing for zero copy implementations. And then, where possible for optimization to keep costs low, can I create a view? Can I predefine my view in the data lake before I use it in Data 360? Try to apply acceleration for large data sets so you're not going back and retrieving the same sets over and over again. Start with 50 million rows, then scale. Don't try to bring in like 10 billion rows right away. Start small, then go to your use case. And as I mentioned with the predicate pushdowns, when you're using queries, make sure you apply a where filter when you're trying to bring back the data. Again, there's a tip at the bottom. Set the correct period for refresh if you're doing acceleration. If it doesn't have to be refreshed every 15 minutes, don't refresh it. And then always use a where clause when you're setting up query federation. So what's next in zero copy? We're innovating. We're constantly adding a lot of new features to our product. So we're having additional premium integrations. So we're going to be integrating with Azure Synapse, Microsoft Fabric, Workday. We have DC to DC sharing. We already have that. That's powering our data clean rooms today, but we're opening it up so that you can actually share data between two data cloud tenants. We have more connectors coming that are going to be on the zero copy foundation. So we're going to have 108 connectors that are going to allow you to directly query data without copying it. And then we are going to be expanding on our zero copy framework for ISVs and partners so that they can build zero copy integrations that will be available as well. Again, thank you for being with us today. We'd love to hear back from you. If you have any feedback, please go ahead and provide that. And then Vijay and I will be down there if you have any questions for us.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks.